Hi, this is Isak from Futucast. This year we got asked by SLUSH to do their first ever SLUSH podcast, or Soaked by SLUSH podcast for their new startup media called Soaked. And obviously we said yes because they get crazy guests every year, so we wanted a piece of that. And we did, and it was pretty crazy, let me be honest. We are releasing these episodes on their platform, but also on ours, because these are also Futucast episodes. I really hope you enjoy them. We are also trying to make more international episodes, so if you have any guests that you would recommend or even know, please help us by telling and letting us know. So, without any further ado and rambling, welcome, and hope you enjoy.
Hi, listeners. Welcome to the Soaked by SLUSH podcast. My name is Isak Rautio. Not next to me, actually, very far away from me right now is William von der Paal, and he's back in Finland. I'm here in Denmark, in Copenhagen, sitting in my own room, and we're making the new episode. First, a Soaked by SLUSH episode through Skype. William, exciting, huh?
Yeah, this is pretty cool. Let's see how it turns out. This first time also everyone is in a different country. We did that one with Adam Grabbed a while back, but then we were all sitting next to each other except the guests. So this is going to be a new form of, let's see how we can handle the questions when we can't sit next to each other.
Yeah. And if we think we are far away from each other, then, I mean, our guest today, Michele Romanow. How do I say your name, by the way? Is it Romanow?
Yeah, Michele Romanow, for sure.
Ooh, I nailed it on the first one. You're in Canada.
It.
In Canada right now. That is far away.
I know, it's cold here.
Same here. Yeah, we all relate about is it the latitude? I guess we can all relate to the weather at this time of the year. But yeah, welcome to the show. Welcome to Soaked by SLUSH podcast.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you
here.
Yeah, maybe we could just start off. We were actually supposed to meet briefly at SLUSH and do it face to face, and then we changed the timetables a little bit and decided to do it this way instead. And but maybe we could start by just giving our listeners a little bit of an overview. Who you are and what you've been doing so far in your life.
Yeah, of course. So I'm a serial entrepreneur. It's actually probably the only thing I know how to do is build businesses and deeply understand, what founders go through and what they think about. And so I started my career in engineering school. Was by the time I had graduated, figured out that worldwide supply of sturgeon caviar of all products was down by 95% because we had overfished the Caspian Sea. This was not a normal thing to think about out of engineering. But we figured this out, and instead of saying that we would take a conventional job, me and my two co-founders moved out to the East Coast the day we graduated and built a fishery from scratch. That's literally everything it sounds like. Boats, fishermen, my hands knee deep in fish, like the whole 9 yards. And our thesis was right. Chefs couldn't find the product, so they had no problem. We had no problem selling it. The problem was we went into a giant recession in 2008, and I was 21 years old selling the world's most superfluous luxury product. So I always think it was good framing to, start my career in, the middle of a recession and see what that was like. So I ended up, getting a job at a big retailer. I saw e-commerce blow up from there. And then with the same co-founders, ended up starting an e-commerce company in Canada. We were self-funded for almost 7 years, became one of the fastest growing Canadian companies, and really grew quickly through, low-cost user acquisition. We just knew if we could acquire users for cheap, we could kind of go and grow forever. And so that ended up being a really big success story. To date, we've acquired 10 different e-commerce companies under the Emerge brand, and the company should go public in a couple of years. So that was, kind of the next piece of that went slightly better than the caviar story. From there, I built another app called Snap Saves that got sold to Groupon in 2014. And, then after that, I ended up joining the board of a few public companies. So I'm on the board of Vail Resorts for the big skiers, and the board of Freshie, which is a salad chain. And the last thing that happened that was probably the most interesting was I was invited to join the cast of the Canadian version of the Shark Tank television series. So it's called Dragon's Den in Canada.
Yeah, I love the show.
And so I've been on the show for 5 years now as an investor. And it was so fascinating because that experience, most people don't know about the show. We film 250 pitches in 17 days. Like it's literally rapid fire back to back so we can get the filming in. But what I saw through that process, and again, on television, you see a lot of e-commerce and product-based companies, is all of these entrepreneurs were coming on the show and they were giving up huge portions of their company to basically go buy Facebook and Google ads, because that is what growth is today. You want to grow, you got to go buy digital ads, digital acquisition. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you know that if you inject $1 into a Facebook ad and you make $4 in sales, why would you use the most expensive capital, which is always going to be equity, where you give up both control of your company and a piece of your company you're never going to get back, to do something that by definition is repeatable and scalable and measurable? And so it was really funny because, I don't think a ton of great ideas come from reality television. It's more seen as a guilty pleasure than...
I think it's underrated.
Well, this ended up being kind of really lucky. And so on the show, I just remember there were these, guys that were making those wooden iPhone cases, and they had a great business, great unit economics. It was like, look, they made each case for $10, $10 in ad spend. They sold it for $50. And they're on the show looking for $100,000 to go buy ads for like 20% of their company. And on the show, this is 5 years ago, I remember being like, look, let's just like try out a different deal type. I'll give you the $100,000. I'm not going to take any equity in your company. But what I want is 5% of your revenue until you pay me back $106,000. So I was only charging 6% for my capital. It wasn't very much. It was like, this was definitely not a loan or a piece of debt. There was no personal guarantee. There was no fixed payment timeline. There was no compounding interest. This was truly a revenue share agreement. And so if they used my capital to grow, I got paid back a little bit faster. And if their business slowed down, I rode along the journey with them. And it's crazy to think now that off that first deal, that's what Clearbanc has become. This year, we'll give founders nearly $1 billion in capital that will invest into 2,000 different companies. And our core product, we'll fund lots of different things, but it was really to give founders access to non-dilutive capital to buy ads. Because if you think about it, say 40% of VC dollars go straight to Google and Facebook, which is insane. And I think there's definitely a better way to do it.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a lack of understanding on how expensive equity actually is and will become in the future? Or is it just that they won't get any other funding sources? You can't get a bank loan. I know in Finland it's pretty easy if you have a solid idea to go to the bank and or have various different governmental organizations fund you. But because that seems like so counterintuitive in many ways that to give up equity.
Yeah, I think, since the beginning of time, it's never been easy for founders to raise money. And that's amazing to hear that the banks in Finland have become, more open to startup ideas. I think, certainly in America, what we see is that all banks, before you're under $10 million in revenue, require a personal guarantee. So that means you basically say, if your business fails, you can take my personal assets. And I think, being an entrepreneur is like one of the hardest jobs in the world. Like, you're trying to build something from scratch. You're already taking so much risk. To then put all of your personal assets on the line, it is just something that I've never done. Like, that's been way too high of a risk tolerance for me to do. And so I think that's what we've typically seen. There are some countries where for equity investments, you take personal guarantees on top of that. And so it was really important that we were giving access to capital that didn't have personal guarantees, and that was easy and fast. The other thing with equity is that the equity fundraising process takes 3 to 6 months, even if you have a great company. It just takes time to meet all the investors, prepare all the materials, go through all the diligence. You have to meet 100 investors to get 10 people interested. And, in contrast, we called our product the 20-minute term sheet, where if you plug in your data to us within 20 minutes, we can tell you how much capital you can qualify for. So there's really nothing to lose to seeing if there's another option available for you. And we try and make it really, really fast. And because it's just like throughout history, it was always like the folks with money, the kings that decided which companies got built, which roads got built. And I think if we can shift just a little bit more power to founders, we can live in a much better world.
Yeah, it's kind of like an analogy with TV shows and stuff. Like whenever a producer starts meddling too much with the actual production. I mean, I'm sure this is a different context. Like obviously, as an investor, you might have some previous knowledge or information or wisdom to part on. But still, it seems like this weird thing that because it's way different here in Europe, as William said, not way different, but it's still like the culture is a bit different. It's not as accepted that you just have to give up half or over half your company like in the first round funding. That's like, is that just something now people got used to it, and this is just was sort of supported by an argument like this is how it works, this is just how this works, like deal with it?
Well, look, I think every company is completely different in terms of how much equity you're giving up and how much round. The stat I was saying before is that 40% of VC dollars go to Facebook and Google, and so that's throughout different rounds. I think typical round size is still you're probably taking 20%, 10 to 30% dilution all the way up, depending on which round you're going. I think you asked me another really good question, which is why is it so hard to understand the cost of equity? And it's because VC has done a very good job advertising themselves, and there doesn't appear to be a cost today. Like if you looked at whatever the APR of the seed round of Uber, it had 5 zeros in the APR that was charged. But it was very, very hard to see that because people forget, like it's like, okay, if I'm getting a $2 million investment, those investors want $20 million back 5 years later. Like it's not free money. It appears to be free because you're giving up a percentage of the company, but it makes a huge difference when you have an exit. It makes a huge difference because investors always get their money out first. Sometimes they have a liquidation preference, so they get more than just their money out first. They get additional money on top of that out first. And so I think it's really important to think long and hard about being capital efficient, but also having funding sources that just, don't make you give up control and don't make you give up a PC or company.
Yeah. So if you look at, you're trying obviously to solve the problem, we could maybe go back a bit and maybe explain a bit more in depth, what Clearbanc is and when you founded it and how long you've been doing it. You said you are funding 2,000 companies this year. Which is a crazy amount. I don't think any VC firm can say the same. So it would be interesting to hear a bit about the path sort of to this stage where you are today.
Yeah, it's a great question. So me and my co-founder Andrew D'Souza started the company in 2015. After I was leaving Groupon. And our view was, that financial services were really changing. And, it took us a few iterations to get here. I mean, we worked on, thinking that there was going to be a lot of gig workers in the economy. So we built products for Uber drivers and for Airbnb hosts. And it was an experiment we were running in the e-commerce community based off this deal I had done off the television show that just started to really work. And so, what we've been able to do is really use data as our advantage. And because there's so many digital data sources, it's really fast for the users to plug in their data. But it was also, far more predictive than using what, traditional folks had used, which was often, metrics like personal credit score, which really had nothing to do with how your business was performing. And so we took, a lot of the diligence that venture capitalists were doing. We look at, your lifetime value to your cost of acquisition ratios. We look at how much of your Facebook audience you've saturated, all those kind of things to say like, look, these look like companies. And then, we've been able to scale with a lot of our companies. So we'll start companies as low as $10,000 in monthly revenue. And then we will scale all the way up to investing $10 million into some of our companies as a true replacement for like a Series B. And so that's been kind of the story. And now we're 200 people strong in Toronto.
and you do all the investments with the same logic. So you take a certain percent of the top line, and you still don't take any equity even on the big investments.
No, we don't take any equity.
Well, that's pretty cool, I must say.
Thank you. And the entrepreneurs have a choice of what their revenue share is, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you're a digital company like an app and you have your product is basically 100% margin, I think that, sorry, what was I going to say? If you can share a larger portion of your revenue with us than if you a physical good product where your revenue share might be, a couple percentage points.
You touched upon the market. Yeah, go ahead, William. No, you probably have a better question.
Probably not, but no. Just wondering. You made a lot of investments already. Have you seen? Is the model working as well in terms of a traditional bank or VC has to look at things like default rates and risk management and all this? Do you find that you get your money out of these companies? Is this do you have enough data already to basically compare this the returns and the model and also the risk return rate if you compare it to a traditional VC firm or traditional bank loans?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we've been able to show, because we've been at this for a long time now, it's been almost 4 years, is we made a lot of mistakes in the early days. Like, we were really building a brand new model from scratch. But I think, at this point, given, we've raised almost $420 million, we've clearly shown that the model is working. It's more predictive, and it has really compelling returns for investors.
Yeah. What do you see? Because you probably have some kind of insight into this.
Yeah.
What do you see? How do you see the kind of value or the values or the sort of the mindset of the founders these days, as far as that can be generalized in actually starting and founding a startup in the first place? Like, what are some because Slush this year, we talked a lot about this, and the world seems to be going through such a fast change right now, and you're actually young enough to sort of naturally have to care about it because you're probably going to be around for quite a while, and so this is your future too.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you sort of see this change in I guess the environment or the even capitalism as a system? How do you see this change in mindset in the founders, like the practical decisions and sort of value sets that they have going into becoming a founder of a startup?
What do you mean by that? Like, what is their what specifically politically are you thinking of that's influencing them?
Yes, maybe politically. I'm thinking maybe like people seem to go. You can, I guess, characterize them as like these stereotypically millennial values, but like having an impact. But like, because you're on the sort of front lines of this, and you can see like how does this sort of vague concept of having an impact kind of translate into a business idea?
It's a really,
does that make sense?
Yes, of course. I think every generation has wanted to have an impact in their own way. There was just different surrounding their ability to have an impact at certain times. And so, the amazing part about the millennial generation is we've lived through a period of complete relative peace, even looking back 2 generations versus, some of the challenges our parents were dealing with. And there is certainly, I think, always this incredible sense of optimism that is wonderful about younger generations. And we are seeing that with millennials. I mean, all of these companies today are looking to be mission driven. They have, charitable and sustainable components from the very beginning. We see that with a ton of our portfolio companies. And they're selling better and they're resonating with the customer. And so that's really good. I still think, and I'm a big believer in founders. I mean, I look at, a lot of, like, I look at big challenges today that the world has, like climate change. And you can look at, the now trillions of dollars that governments have spent on some of these initiatives. And who has made the biggest impact to date are still the founders. I mean, it's the founders that are building cars and trucks that are electric that people want to drive. It was the Nest thermostat in the US that made a meaningful difference. And so I'm just very bullish on founders generally and their ability to solve some of the world's toughest problems, because there's just such a good model for doing so. And I think that in doing that, there was so much of I think where people can look to our model and see a lot of hope. I mean, one of the other things that we haven't talked about is that in the venture ecosystem, it's still incredibly biased. I mean, in America, 2% of venture dollars goes to women founders, and 80% of the venture dollars in America gets distributed in 4 states: California, New York, Texas, and Massachusetts, which is insane. Like, America's one of the most entrepreneurial countries. There was 9 states last year that had 0 companies that got any money, any venture capital.
Yeah. There's no. Yeah. Sorry.
No, I mean, it just certainly can't mean there's no good entrepreneurs in 9 states, right?
Yeah, and certainly there's no Pareto principle that, exactly that 4 states would have 80% of the best ideas. That just doesn't make sense, or that men would have, in general, better ideas than women. At least, like 2% is insane. Have you been able to sort of how do you look at this? You have a different way, or you have a possibility also to correct this, because you could theoretically also eliminate bias, at least to some extent, with this model that you have, assuming it's automated at least on some parts. So have you been able to do it?
It's a great question, because that's exactly what we've seen, is that when you take so VC is a human to human business, and so you need to be often in the right circles. I mean, venture capitalists generally don't take cold email introductions. Let's just start there. You need to know someone that knows someone. I mean, that in itself breeds such nepotism within an industry. And so when you look at our model, I mean, we've backed 8 times more women than the venture capital industry average. I think that's extraordinary. We have backed founders in 43 different states in America. And I've continued to see that. And it's really not because we did anything special at the top of the funnel. And I really want to stress this. This wasn't like, we went out seeking these businesses. We just took the bias out of the decision-making process. And that in itself made a huge difference, because it's, it's what we've always known. Women create great businesses that have great unit economics, but they have a harder time finding and sourcing funding. And so I think there's a lot of benefit. And so a lot of people will talk about, we're going to introduce AI and data science, and we're just going to repeat our own biases in an automated way. I don't think that needs to be true, and I think we've clearly shown that.
Right. Do you still see that it's like old school VC is kind of still seen more, or like it even takes pride in being more of an art than in science sometimes? Like, just like I'm gonna go with my hunch, gonna go with my gut feeling, and through that sort of process you're doing basically nothing else but confirming the biases that you already have.
It's very true, right? It's this idea of trusting your gut is, a proxy for pattern recognition. A proxy for pattern recognition is you just fund exactly the people that look and feel and talk a certain way. I mean, we could talk about a whole other level of this, which is the way you describe your business to VCs makes an enormous difference. And there's huge, biases in the way we do that, right? I mean, even if you're Canadian versus American, like we typically don't walk into pitches saying like, I remember some of our early pitches, saying, we want to build a brand new type of bank, and this is an enormous market, and entrepreneurs are growing. And I just remember VCs would look at me and be like, yeah, I mean, it's just not big enough. And I was like, what do you want me to say? You want me to build like a bank on Mars? Like, I just don't know how to make this bigger. Like, we're talking about a massive global audience. There is a huge amount of bias that goes into that.
Yeah, and it also seems to show in the type of things that are getting funded as a whole. It seems that there's probably a very big, I don't have any data on this, but there's probably a very like a big bias also on the industries that, certain buzzwords get a lot of funding and certain other things that aren't hot right now will completely bypass funding, or will be at least a lot harder to get money for. But if you look at now, you're probably funding a lot of AI, and you're funding gaming, and you're funding at a few years ago you were funding a lot of blockchain initiatives, and so it seems to be also very cyclical in that sense.
Yeah, no, it's certainly cyclical on, what industries are hot, but it's also very biased to what the audience itself would understand. And so, the best example of this is always Peloton, right? For the average consumer, a $4,000 stationary bike with a television glued to it is not a purchase that they could make regularly. But if you're looking at that group, of course, all of these predominantly male VCs were like, oh, that's great. My wife would buy that for sure. Meanwhile, I remember, pitching a couponing app to VCs saying, like, this app is really targeted at, the 100 million Americans that want to save $20 or more on their grocery bill. And, they would look at me and say things like, well, I'm going to ask my wife if she would use this app. And I'm like, no, this is not your audience. Like, your wife is not in the income bracket that she cares about saving $20 on her grocery bill. Like, I hope she wasn't using this product. And so, we see that in our business all the time. I mean, we get a ton of great referrals from VCs, and they've been wonderful partners of ours. But, I'll get a call that's like, well, this company's doing $20 million of revenue and they're selling shoelaces, but the shoelaces are really ugly, so I just can't get behind it. And I'm like, man, it's not your choice. Like, this is an art. Clearly there's a lot of customers that really like this product. And so I think there's you can see the opportunity. You can see the opportunity there. The other thing I want to go back to really quickly is that
definitely
we were talking about where we are in terms of founder dilution and how much founders are taking. And I think the way to look back on this is to see where even our success stories are when they go public. And so if you looked at all the recent crop of IPOs, Slack, Lyft, Uber, Peloton, I mean, all of these founders owned less than 8% of the company by the time they went public. And I think that's really, really important to look at because, first of all, these are the success stories. Like, these are the true outliers that have done this well. But to own less than 8%, I mean, that's pretty slim. I mean, the founders have left, I think, of 3.5% each. It's a lot of work that they've had to do. And you can make the argument that, these companies have stayed private for longer and therefore they've taken on more dilution. But again, that dilution was really driven by the fact that they had to acquire users. And so if there was a less dilutive way to do that, I think it would have been really beneficial for those founders.
Yeah, I'm sure, and the model seems to be making sense. Are you planning on expanding also outside the States and maybe correcting some of, taking a broader view? Access to funding is even a bigger problem probably in certain parts of the world, in emerging economies, and this could be a really cool or really important vehicle also to solving maybe some of that. Have you decided if you're gonna move abroad with this as well?
Yeah, we've done some experiments internationally already and have seen exactly that if we think it's hard for founders to get capital in America, it's even harder in other parts of the world where banks are more conservative and the venture capital industry is just a lot smaller. And so we'll have some exciting announcements. We're in Canada and the US today, and we'll have some exciting announcements in Q1 about the new countries we're launching.
Okay, looking forward to seeing that as well. You have a pretty massive, probably a massive data set also of companies and businesses that you screen and that you see. Do you have a take on what are some of the big trends for the coming years, or the hottest of the hot right now? What are people doing, and where is the in your space you're doing mainly businesses that have a certain type of business model, but still, do you see some trends within that field?
Of course. So, the vast majority of our companies are e-commerce and apps, and we have some SaaS companies. But I think I would look at a couple of different things. I think one of the trends that we're seeing globally is just a huge focus on health and wellness in a completely different way. And so, we've backed companies that are, like the Peloton, but for boxing is one of them. All sorts of different companies that make it easier for you to consume your water, for you to sit up straight. Like, it is endless. And we've seen these companies actually do really, really well, is everyone is trying to figure out easy ways to get healthier. And there's been a huge focus on that. I think we've seen, some of the resurgence of telemedicine with the Hims and Her model. Jack Abraham is one of our venture partners, which is our own network of partners that can help our founders. And that's been really, really cool to see how they've changed the way that drugs can be delivered online. We've seen, one of the things that's really magical about e-commerce is that you can find different audience size that people have overlooked for a long time. And so we backed one founder called Scrunch It Curls that was all about making products for curly-haired African-American women. And, she was rejected, and many of these products have been rejected from drugstores because, they're saying that the population isn't big enough. I mean, she's built an incredible business by being able to follow these communities online. And so I think those are some of the things that will continue to happen for the upcoming years here.
The Peloton for boxing, how does that work? That caught I barely was able to listen to that sentence to the end because I was just picturing in my head. I probably want to get that.
Yeah. Let me just check the name of this company. It's just escaping my mind really quickly. Okay. So here we go. Now we can get a clean cut.
Yeah.
So the Peloton for boxing is called Fight Camp, and they were a YC company. You buy the equipment, which is the bag and the gloves, which have sensors in them. And then you have a coach on your screen or your television that takes you through exactly the work that you should be doing. And so, look, I make fun of Peloton a little bit because it was certainly in the perfect sweet spot for VCs and that demographic to understand. But I mean, I also own a Peloton. I absolutely love it. It makes me super competitive. And I think that anything that makes fitness easier and more successful in terms of people doing, because look, stationary exercise equipment has been around for a very long time. It has just always been a matter of using it.
I'm just waiting for the next Rocky movie where the coach just is like virtual AI and just on the screen, and you never see him live.
I love it.
Funny movie.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's talk about how, because you're actually, this is a random coincidence, you're the same age as Finland's new prime minister, Sanna Marin, who's also a woman, and that's I guess the first question is, what happened to Gen X? Why are they being skipped all of a sudden? What did they do?
Gen X is the generation above us, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And what do people think of the new prime minister?
Mostly very positive. It kind of came as a surprise because she wasn't sort of per se elected for the job. She was, but indirectly. Like, she came into power because the previous prime minister had to resign, and then they within the party they voted her to become the prime minister. But very, very great reception, not only in Finland but internationally.
Oh yeah.
It's I think the whole coalition government right now is led by women. So, obviously, in the long run, when you look back, this is not I don't think Finland's going to become a utopia. People are still people, but it's just a nice thing to sort of get over with. We are all sort of okay with this now. Let's deal with this, and people are just people. So I think the next this is just a nice sort of cultural hurdle to get over, which is how I think many people are seeing it, which I think is great. And she's great. She's a very sort of I think came from humble beginnings, sort of can relate to I guess the normal person, but then she's extremely smart.
That's amazing. I think that internationally we heard the same thing, which is to have young, smart, grounded leaders. Really makes a huge difference in how we build countries and how we build our policies. And it's an enormous task to run a country. And so, we're all really rooting for her.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, us too, because it's our country. I'm here in Denmark right now, but I'm crossing my fingers. Yeah, definitely. But so how do you see the future sort of in general? Like, because it's no surprise. I don't know how much this probably came up. I mean, my parents, they lived through the Cold War, and everyone has their own sort of, as you said, like everyone has their own sort of desire for impact and their own sort of worries and stuff. But like, how are you seeing your own future? This is a massive question, but I mean, pick your sort of, I guess, favorite part of that question, because like, how are you maybe your general attitude? I mean, you seem like you're a successful entrepreneur. I mean, and I think anyone would be a successful entrepreneur without an optimistic worldview. Like, how do you generally see the future of not only you but your surroundings?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great broad question.
Very broad. I think it's the broadest question that you could ask anyone.
Isak is an expert at those.
Very poignant and very incisive questions. Yes.
I think that is the disposition of an entrepreneur, is that the world is getting a lot better versus the world is getting a lot worse.
Right.
And, as media has become more and more disaggregated from facts, like, there was a time in the 1980s even, like, where it was like an incredible job to work at the New York Times. And, the standard we had on producing journalism and facts were at a totally different place than we are now. And look, we're all immune to it. It doesn't, like, we all click on clickbait. There's a reason that we all like to know the 3 things to do to never be this or to always be this, right? It's
absolutely.
We've been selling quick fixes since the beginning of time. But despite that, and despite that, we have real issues, I think, with misinformation. Right now the world is more conscious than ever on, the social issues that we have to deal with as a society. I think the environment has become, a huge topic. And I think for me personally, if I can enable more entrepreneurs, that is going to have the biggest impact. Because one of the things that happens when you're a celebrity is you get asked to talk a lot. And it's like, okay, can you teach the next generation of entrepreneurs? Can, you inspire them? Can you produce content for them? And all of those things are completely doable. I just think that when you ultimately look at what holds most entrepreneurs back from most backgrounds is their ability to get access to funding. And what has traditionally happened is if you are from a rich family, or if you went to the right circles or the right place for university, you could find networks that could fund you. And if you didn't have that chance. And I think that solving that little problem is not a little problem, it's a massive unlock. Because we have known, I mean, you can look at the entrepreneurs that build the biggest companies. And frankly, they're not from silver spoon families. They're from immigrant families. They're from people that grew up in not great circumstances, that were used to having to constantly fight. And that perseverance made them incredible entrepreneurs, gave them a ton of grit. And often it's those folks that build the most successful companies, but do have the hardest time getting funding. And so I think, to me, I get asked, like, okay, if you weren't running Clearbanc, what would you do? Like, my genuine answer is I would restart this company. Like, I think it's so important, the work that we're doing, because I see it all the time. Like, every Friday we go through all the companies we funded, and some of the stories just bring you to tears. Like, it's incredible founders that, and that's not only the case. It's not only people that couldn't, find access to funding. There are certainly some of those. There are also some people that had great options from tier 1 VCs that were like, okay, this is actually a better deal for me for what I want to do right now. And there's people that do both, where it's like, okay, well, I can take $5 million of venture capital and $5 million from Clearbanc, and I don't have to give up all of that extra dilution. And so I think we have we have some real problems to solve, but I think society today is more conscious than ever about how we solve those. I think entrepreneurs are going to play a huge role in making that possible for the consumers to do. And I think enabling founders to do that through capital is probably one of the most important impacts that we can make.
Absolutely. Sounds great. What do you think, William?
I'm just processing. No, but I agree, because we've been talking for many years already, also in this podcast and otherwise, about how inefficient the world is and how hard it seems to be to solve some of the big issues, and how exactly the solutions won't be on a governmental. It won't be the politicians, it won't be the government solving these problems, because it's just they have it's not their fault per se, it's the system's fault, and it just seems that more and more people will become and will also have to become some sort of entrepreneurs, and it seems like this model is perfectly timed to exactly do a massive unlock on the system, as you said. So couldn't agree more, and I certainly hope that your model will be successful and enable you to find
Seems like
more
it
and
is.
more. Yeah, it certainly sees that way, and we certainly hope that we'll also keep spinning and enable you to do more and more, because it seems like there really is not that big of a limit on how far you could go with that model.
Mm-hmm.
What is
Finally,
kind
someone
of
who gets it has the money.
Yeah, I mean, this also doesn't work if we were just a tiny company, right? Like if we had been able to deploy $20 million a year, that's very different, right? We had to get to scale as well to show that we can be a true alternative to VC, and so that was, one of our big points as well, is that we had to get to scale.
Do you have kind of a vision on how big you want the scale to be? How far do you think you can take it, or how far do you want to take it? Do you want to inspire the model, or do you want to do it with Clearbanc? The whole unlock.
I think that certainly anything that enables kind of the next generation of founders is good. I mean, we want to be a huge part of that story, I think, both internationally and the way that we're building this now. And we have, there's a lot of just data that goes into building this. This is a really hard business to run because, there's a lot of risks in startups. This isn't just like, all these companies, stick around. They're not asset backed. It's not like, when we were funding restaurants and, if the restaurant didn't pay your capital back, you could go take their pizza oven. There's no assets. There's no hard assets in these businesses. And so we had to get a lot tighter around, the digital data that they were producing and what that looked like for their business. But I mean, we want to be a huge part of this story globally, and we think we have a shot to do that.
Yeah. I think, that's a pretty good ending for me. I mean, I really hope that you'll be successful with this company as well, and that you will make the kind of impact that you want to make. And we, or at least speaking for myself, I personally believe that this is something that absolutely will happen. So we're just going to wish you the best of luck on your journey, and hope that maybe we cross paths along the way as well.
I would love that. You guys have built something really, really special. It was my very first time in Finland for SLUSH, and I'm definitely going to be back.
Yeah, how was it? How was your SLUSH?
Oh, it was awesome. I couldn't believe, I mean, first of all, like everything in Europe, American conferences are great, but like everything was so much more artistic and fun. Like this party that we had with the sauna where people were in the sea. I was like, this is amazing. There were so many cool parts of SLUSH. And then I had a whole day to run around Helsinki, and I'm half Ukrainian, so I didn't know that there was such a large Slavic influence. It was such a cool city. Your library was absolutely stunning. It was. I will definitely be back. It was one of the coolest places I've been in a long time.
Happy to hear. Yeah, I mean, you can really tell that SLUSH as an event is student driven. You can definitely see that sort of. I mean, we do this. I mean, this doesn't. This is one of my favorite sayings, but it doesn't translate to English. But it's like seriously, but not seriously. But they're two different words of seriously with two different connotations. The Finnish listeners will understand this. International listeners, you just have to trust me. It makes a lot of sense. And you as well, Michelle. Yeah, but it makes a lot. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, this has been great. It's been very, very. It's just a pleasure to meet you virtually. I mean, this is just your voice. We haven't seen each other through the camera, but I mean, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming, and please stick on the line for a few minutes, and we'll wrap it up. But at this point, we'll say thank you to all the listeners, and most of all, thank you for joining.